Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. Tonight's show is made possible because the Organic Man coffee trike keeps me caffeinated. A coffee is the lifeblood of my world. 4501 McPherson for the nectar of the gods. If you aren't in Laredo, you can get your coffee by going to organicmancoffeetrike.shop. You can order coffee and then you can enjoy life more. Sunday, July 16th, 2023, I will be speaking at the McAllen Public Library, 4001 North 23rd Street. I'll be talking about the flying disc that crashed in Mexico, 1948, 1 year after Roswell. Come on by and learn something that those people don't want you to know about. If you want to be there at the library, they're asking you to kind of reserve a seat. It's not that they're expecting thousands of people to show up, it's just kind of a small room. So if you'd like to come by and actually see me live and in person talking, you can call the library 956 681 3000, or you can contact them by email at mcallenlibrary.libnet, that's Libnet, .info /events. Like I said, it's not that they're expecting thousands of people. It's not that big of a room. They don't want you having to stand out in the hallway. When one person sees a UFO and talks about it, the naysayers can rush out and say things like the witness drank too much, or he was on drugs, or he was crazy or confused. He didn't know what he was seeing, or he was simply making the whole thing up. You hear this all the time. Those people aren't trying to convince you or me that there's nothing to see here. The focus is the general public, the folks that want to believe that there's nothing out there because it would make their lives uncomfortable if they thought that there was anything going on that the government couldn't explain away. So they come up with these outlandish explanations, some of which will make your head spin, and people believe it. Oh, that wasn't a ghost you saw. It was just your imagination, or it was something you were seeing a reflection or something. You didn't actually see Bigfoot out in the woods. It was a bear walking through the woods on his way to the post office. Things like that. It was a weather balloon. That's my all-time favorite. In Farmington, New Mexico, March 1950, there was a mass sighting involving hundreds of witnesses. Some witnesses said there were hundreds of UFOs seen in the skies. To add to the story, this took place during daylight hours. It wasn't at night. It was spanned 3 days. Now, Farmington is about 50 miles east of the Four Corners area where New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, and Colorado meet. Newspapers all over New Mexico ran front page stories about how this town was being invaded by aliens from outer space. The sightings and articles were almost 3 years before the CIA put together the Robertson's panel. In January 1953, the Central Intelligence Agency convened a group of scientists to investigate whether these unknown phenomena in the sky represented a national security threat. The panel had been told ahead of time what their investigation was going to find. They were also told how they should make fun of anybody that reports seeing a UFO and just heap derision on them, make them look like a total fool. The panel was so successful that even today, many people will still look at any UFO report as if it was being made by crazy people. You watch the evening news and the news people, the talking heads, they'll say, oh, yes, somebody saw a UFO, and then they'll kind of chuckle at the camera, like, ha ha, I don't believe that, and you shouldn't either. Even after the Pentagon came out and said, those things aren't ours, and they're not the Russians, and they're not the Chinese, but whose are they then? Some UFO investigators say the Farmington Flap is one of the biggest stories in history, yet few people have even heard of it. The folks running the Department of Truth have done an excellent job in making this incident vanish like a lot of others. David Marler is a UFO researcher and author who also works in the healthcare field. David received his Bachelor of Science degree in psychology from Southern Illinois University in Edwardsville. He's not some guy living in his parents' basement who's trying to make a name for himself. The guy already has a career. He doesn't need the attention as a UFO investigator. He finds it fascinating. He has one of the largest historical UFO archives of books, journals, magazines, newspapers, microfilm, audio recordings, and case files from around the world that spans the last 75 years. If you want to check him out, go to davidmarlerufo.com. Marler isn't alone in being compelled to look into the 1950 flap. A lot of people living in San Juan County, where Farmington is located, have direct ties to the mass sighting that has become a part of their family history. Patty Tharp of San Juan County Historical Society is the niece of one of the witnesses, Clayton Body, who was the business manager of the Daily Times in the 1950s. She recalls her late uncle regularly talking about the sightings where she was growing up and said that the tales of the UFO armada is well known among the county's older residents. She remembers her uncle as a man not given to exaggeration and said he wasn't the kind to call attention to himself by manufacturing outlandish stories. He believed he witnessed something out of the ordinary that day. Over the 3 days at around nine, over a 3 day period at about 11 a.m. until noon, people were seeing UFOs. Farmington had a population of around 4 or 5,000 residents at the time. Many of them saw the UFOs and they filed reports both with the local authorities and people coming from out of town, as well as the military. People said they were seeing saucer shaped objects at around 15,000 feet, moving in ways that no aircraft and no birds would move. They would shoot back and forth across the sky, narrowly missing each other. Some folks spotted a red UFO that looked like it was kind of in charge. The others were white or a kind of a yellowish color. As one person would spot the UFOs in the sky, they would point them out to others, eventually involving the entire downtown area. For an hour, the craft would fly around in the sky and then they would all vanish at once. Marler said there are several elements that separate the Farmington UFO incident from so many others, mostly the fact that so many people said they had witnessed it. The sightings took place at 11 a.m. to noon each day in the skies over San Juan County, Not at night, but in the daytime when you could easily see. Handfuls of people would look up and watch these craft flying around. The Daily Times chronicled how pedestrians along Main Street could be seen looking skyward and pointing. The paper was deluged with calls from readers reporting the objects, although the story explains that high winds and a dust storm prevented a very clear vision. The account explains how the objects appear to play tag, traveling at almost unbelievable speeds. The paper quoted Bodie, a former Army captain who said he was on Broadway Avenue when he became aware of the phenomenon. He said, "All of a sudden, I noticed a few moving objects high in the sky. Moments later, there appeared to be hundreds of them." Bodie declined. Bodie declined to estimate the size or the speed of the objects, but he said they appeared to fly at an altitude of approximately 15,000 feet. Several witnesses were quoted in the stories as well, including merchants' housewives, mechanics, insurance agents, and the head of the Farmington unit of the Soil Conservation Service. A man named Harold Thatcher was quoted as emphatically denying a theory that the objects people were seeing were bits of cotton floating in the sky. And now, I've never seen saucer shaped cotton, but that's what they tried to explain it away as. Many of these witnesses reported seeing a single red object that appeared to be leading all of the others. Marlowe Webb was a 26-year-old manager in the parts department at a garage on Main Street in downtown Farmington. Webb told the paper he estimated the objects were small, about the size of a dinner plate, and noted the objects moved in an unusual way. They would go sideways, on edge, and at every conceivable angle. He said this is what made it easy to determine that they were saucer shaped. Webb said he was working at his stepfather's Chevy dealership across the street from the Tato Theater on March 17, 1950, when somebody told him they had seen saucer shaped objects in the sky. Webb went out to have a look. He said he could make out 12 to 20 objects. He also said they were loosely arranged, not in any kind of a formation that he could figure out, but they were moving in an east to west direction. They were darting around almost like leaves in the sky being blown around, he said. Webb watched the objects for approximately 10 to 15 minutes, and then he went back inside to work. He had a job to do, and his stepfather probably didn't want the parts counter being unattended for too long of a time. He said he recalled seeing people on Main Street looking into the sky for a long time after he was back in. Many of those witnesses were a lot more taken by the event than he was. They were known to talk about what they'd seen for years after the event. Webb said he spoke to a military investigator after the incident and told him the same story. He understands that some people wanted to draw other conclusions from what they'd heard about the event, but he said he never felt the urge to do that. Another well known authority on local history, Marilou Wayburn, author of Homestead to Boomtown, a pictorial history of Farmington, New Mexico, said she was in college in Missouri in the spring of 1950 when the incident took place. She got an earful about it from her friends when she returned to Farmington at the end of the semester. Wayburn wound up writing about the mass sighting on its 40th anniversary in March 1990 edition of Cross Currents, an independent publication that describes itself as a journal of life in the Four Corners. In her story, Wayburn recounts that she heard the story dozens of times after she returned from college, and a group of her friends took her to a location that was supposed to be where a landing took place. She described it as a large circle about 60 feet in diameter, where the sagebrush had been flattened out and singed weeds were all around the edges. So you get this giant circle 60 feet across, and it's burned all around the edges. It almost sounds like what happened in Mexico in 1948. Wayburn also quoted a Farmington resident named Pauline McCauley, who said she was just a little girl at the time of the sighting. McCauley said she was herding sheep south of town that day when she heard a sound above her. Looking up, she saw a circular object that looked like an upside down bowl. Macaulay told Wayburn the object had windows and she could see people inside, and they looked like they were wearing caps and navy blue uniforms of some type. Wayburn heard various other stories over the years, many of them from people who didn't want their names used for fear of being ridiculed. She said the incident sparked a great deal of curiosity at the time and remains a topic of discussion for the older folks. They took it for what it was, she said, that it was something they wanted to know more about. Rio Rancho resident Ron Bodie, the son of the witness Clayton Bodie, said his father talked about the incident occasionally over the years, but he never made a big deal of it. The last time I really talked to my dad about that was probably 40 years ago, he said, adding that his father was a veteran of World War II and the Korean War, and he was not easily impressed. It was unusual to him, but not earth shattering or life changing. When you've been in war twice, seeing a UFO, that wouldn't be a whole lot of excitement, not like getting shot at. Ron Bodie said his father was still a major in the Army Reserves at the time of the incident, and he recalls his father getting a phone call from a military official asking him to refrain from doing any more interviews on the subject. So even back then, the military was trying to hush things up. Tharp, Clayton Bodie's niece, also has taken a keen interest in the event. She said the wire services picked up the story on the incident from New Mexico papers, and she had collected clippings that mentioned her uncle from newspapers all over the country. She agreed with her cousin, Ron Bodie, that her uncle didn't consider the appearance of the strange objects to be an alien invasion. He seemed to think it was something, he seemed to not think it was something from another planet, that it was some kind of a military experiment. The quality and quantity of the information surrounding the Farmington UFO event has always impressed Marler. He said the accounts and the witnesses who were quoted in the Daily Times were remarkably consistent. And when those people talked about their memories of that day years later, their stories hadn't changed. He said, I'm really struck by the sincerity and the honesty of the people I interviewed. They're not saying they saw flying saucers, but they saw something that looked like a saucer that was flying. That separates them from the principals and other UFO stories he has investigated, many of whom are not nearly as credible. He said it really smacks of reality, adding that the witnesses he spoke to unfailingly recalled their parents as grounded, level headed people who were not looking for attention. He also noted that an account of a UFO sighting occurred that day in Tucumcari, An event reported March 18th, 1950 edition of the Tuka Tucumcari Daily, must be an Indian word, Tucumcari Daily News, and an Air Force captain and two technical sergeants at Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque reported seeing three strange objects in the sky that afternoon. Marler also has collected newspaper accounts of UFO sightings from that time period, not just across New Mexico, but all over Texas and into Mexico. His website explains that after an unofficial investigation, a government official responded to public curiosity over the event by claiming the objects that people had seen were the remnants of a ruptured high altitude U.S. Navy skyhook balloon. Marler, who has presented several lectures on his findings, flatly dismisses this theory, explaining that it might have been plausible for one day of the UFO sightings, but not for 3 days. He also pointed to research that showed there were no documented skyhook balloons launched at that time. Given the technological limitations of the era, there were no photos or film footage of the Farmington incident. Marler points out that if such an event were to happen now, there likely would be an abundance of such material. But he takes the mass UFO sighting here much more seriously than he does many other events he has investigated, and said he's not sure why it hasn't gotten attention that he thinks it deserves. He said the Farmington incident is well known in UFO research stories, but he acknowledges it is not nearly as well known as Roswell incident or the crash of the UFO at Aztec 1947, an event commemorated through an annual mountain bike race etched in local pop culture. The Aztec UFO incident involved the discovery of a saucer shaped craft measuring approximately 100 feet in diameter atop a mesa in New Mexico, 8 months and some 370 miles from the crashed saucer at Roswell. Through his research, Marler said he has tried to eliminate various possible explanations for what happened in Farmington. When you eliminate those prosaic explanations, it's like checking off a list. What you're left with is an unknown, but unknown does not equal extraterrestrial. The question of why the Farmington incident never captured the public's imagination the way Roswell did is a riddle to Marler and some other UFO investigators. Tharp doesn't see it as unexplainable as to why people don't remember the incident. She says that she thinks that Roswell is just as get back to this. She thinks that the people in Roswell are no more conservative than the people living in Farmington. There were so many people in 1950 who lived in the town who all said that they saw something flying over the city that they couldn't explain. Farmington is described as a conservative place that likely would bristle at being associated with little green men. Some folks believe the folks there have just decided to leave the incident behind. That's why you don't have any books out called The Crash at Farmington. As far as UFO crashes not being talked about, how about the Laredo incident? It was 1 year after Roswell, and the craft crashed in Mexico. It had to be trucked out and sent to Wright-Patterson Air Base. I'll tell more about the crash at McAllen Library if you get a chance. And if you don't make it there, I'll also be talking about it at the San Antonio UFO Festival. In 1969, residents of Berkshire County in Massachusetts went into a panic after multiple people reported seeing a UFO. The furor over the sighting reached far beyond the area and captivated people all over America. In Roswell, New Mexico, a replica of the vessel was displayed at the International UFO Museum. On the evening of September 1st, 1969, strange lights descended on the town of Sheffield, located in the southern Berkshires. Many who saw these lights said they were attached to a UFO. The term Berkshires is normally used by the locals in reference to a portion of the Vermont based Green Mountains that extend south into western Massachusetts and farther south into northwest Connecticut. The Berkshires are also made up of many very small towns, not any big cities. In 2015, a group of residents who witnessed the 1969 UFO raised funds and they built a monument to it. According to witness accounts, the UFO in question was a dark shaped craft that performed acrobatic maneuvers in the sky over the Berkshires. It's unclear exactly how long the phenomenon lasted. Many of the witnesses of the UFO described losing track of time. Now, they didn't say they lost time, only that they lost track of how long they were watching. It's not like they woke up an hour after the incident. Sheffield, where many of the witnesses resided, had a population of a little over 3,000 people. The brief UFO encounter was powerful enough to leave a lingering sense of mass confusion in its wake. School children were drawing UFOs in class, while adults called in the local radio station to talk about what they had seen. We had listeners calling the radio station that evening, said David Issy, a general manager of the local radio station WSBS. At the time, they didn't know it was a UFO. They just called the station to say there was something bizarre happening. Many people who saw the strangely lit vessel that night were left bewildered. Nobody seemed to know what they saw, but they knew that they saw something. The incident has since been dubbed the 1969 Berkshire UFO. It was later estimated that about 40 people reported seeing this craft. Some of them were children at the time, and they still live in the area today. Children were coming into school talking about the event, said Robert Kroll, the director of the Great Barrington Historical Society. An older student of mine, one is a local shop owner whose father was the police chief in town. These are reliable people. There is no self promotion going on. It's not like they were trying to attract tourists to their area. According to Thomas Reed's account, he saw the UFO when he was 9 years old. It was September 1st, 1969, when he was in a car with his mother, his grandmother, and his brother. As Reed recalls, the family was heading home from the restaurant they owned called the Village on the Green. Suddenly, they noticed a mass of glowing lights peeking out through the trees ahead on the road. The strange lights continued to spill out from behind the trees as the family crossed the covered Sheffield Bridge, but they didn't know what to make of it. We all looked at it because it was kind of self-contained glow. Thomas Reed said, it rose up a little bit. It looked like it was following the dirt road, which I'm sure it probably wasn't. It appeared that way because we could see it through the trees. The light started to bleed through once we broke into a little bit of a clearing. We could see inside the car, the light was flooding the interior. After an amber glow emerged on both sides of the road, Reed recalled being taken to a hangar like area that was as big as a football field. We encountered something, Reed said. It was definitely not of this world. We had a black and white TV at the time, and the imagery that we saw on this thing was unbelievable. There were lights that looked like fluorescent tubing inside this hangar. This hallway we had seen was circular with a Y configuration, almost to control the flow of traffic. This one room had a bowed in wall that was rounded. It was not something that you would have seen in 1969. I have no idea where I was, but I know that what I saw was very different than anything I'd ever seen today in the last 50 years. Glimpses of this strange place muddied his brain until he realized that they were back inside the car. His grandmother and mother had switched places. Everything got really calm. It was like being in the middle of a hurricane. There was a barometric change in pressure. It was just like a dead silence. Then there was an eruption of crickets and frogs, and it got really loud, and, well, that was it. Reed said, adding that it was all quite confusing. Many occasions when people have been abducted and then come to in a different location, like Travis Walton when he woke up in Heber, sometimes they have discovered that their shoes are on the wrong feet. Sometimes the buttons on their shirts don't line up correctly. Just little things that perhaps the aliens don't understand that need to be done correctly, or maybe they do it to mess with us. People wake up in the morning and they're on the wrong side of the bed. They've switched places with their spouse. Just little weird things like that that nobody can explain. Reed has been the most vocal witness to the 1969 Berkshire UFO. He helped convince other witnesses to pool money and erect a 5,000-pound concrete monument, which was built by the covered Sheffield Bridge where he had seen the UFO along with his family. They put in benching and lighting decorations so that the place was a little more attractive for people that wanted to visit it. Later, Reed formed the nonprofit UFO Monument Park, incorporated in order to maintain the monument. Disagreements between those who believed the UFO marked a significant event in the town's history, and those who saw the monument as an eyesore began to boil over. In 2019, 4 years after it was erected, the town removed the Berkshire UFO monument. The town's attorney assessment that the monument had been erected on town property quickly paved the way for its removal. According to Reed, there were no issues with the town officials during the plans to build the UFO monument. The plaque on the Berkshire UFO monument described it as our nation's first off world UFO incident. The naysayers will go to extremes to do away with any kind of a UFO recognition, even if it's carved in stone. If not for Stanton Friedman having interviewed Jesse Marcel, we might never have heard of Roswell. There were lots of witnesses, but they had all been talked to, and none of them wanted to wind up dead out in the desert somewhere. March 8th, 1994, something unexplainable took place over Lake Michigan. More than 300 residents reported observing strange lights in the sky. Some of these lights traveled at unbelievable speeds. Some of them made incredible maneuvers. UFOs were spotted hovering over the water and then disappearing into the sky. That night, residents living along Lake Michigan shores observed one of the world's largest UFO sightings. Luminous orbs danced erratically in the night sky over the water, were seen as far south as Indiana state line. Many callers reported the strange flying objects to the local police. Concerned citizens called dispatch more than 300 times. It was later confirmed by the National Weather Service there were large objects in the sky over the lake. objects that were not airplanes. Using the radar system, NWS meteorologist Jack Bushong, in charge of the office at the Muskegon County Airport, recorded the objects and coordinated rapid speeds and movement. Although the meteorologist accomplished this feat while communicating with the local police, who verified the UFO's high speed and impossible maneuvers, he refused to discuss the incident for professional reasons. Additionally, the NWS asked him to not speak to the media about the matter for fear of losing credibility and being ridiculed by his colleagues. Bushong admitted to seeing Lake Michigan UFOs in 1994 after retiring from the NWS. He made this declaration in a TV show, Something in the Sky, an episode of Unsolved Mysteries, which premiered on October 2022. The objects appeared to be airplanes, but they didn't act as if they were any kind of a man made flying craft. As a result of the amount of energy returned by the echoes, they appeared to be solid, smooth, and highly reflective objects. A triangular formation was observed on radar returns as the UFOs came and flew at an altitude of approximately 6,500 feet. One of the objects, the northernmost light, soared 100,000 feet over the lake and just stayed there. Several of the other craft formed a triangle again and hovered for a few seconds. Bouchon said that he could not think of anything in nature that could have done what the UFOs were doing. It seemed like the UFOs were trying to draw attention to themselves. He said the UFOs stopped and stayed for several hours. Bouchon said he watched them the entire time. The witness could see dozens of other objects along the way. The craft did maneuvers like flying from 3,000 feet to 50,000 feet in the matter of seconds. One of these objects moved 20 miles in less than a second. This means they were traveling at 71,000 miles an hour. This is fast enough to fly from New York to Los Angeles in 2 minutes. Bouchon concluded, I do not know of any technology that can travel at that speed. He excluded any meteorological explanation for the occurrence. Bouchon's desire to continue working motivated him to keep quiet. If you see something and say something, you get invited to work elsewhere. Having only worked at the NWS for 3 years at the time of the Lake Michigan incident, he hadn't developed a strong scientific reputation yet. If he were to be fired for his job, finding a new one, other than flipping burgers, would have been nearly impossible. Even after years of service developing a reputation as being a reliable scientist, he still feared the mockery that would occur. In 2016, after he retired from the NWS, Bouchon began sharing his experiences with small media outlets. After the UFO report was released in June of 2021, he felt confident enough to speak out. UFOs were officially acknowledged as a national security issue by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. According to Bouchon, learning that the military and the government were taking UFOs seriously prompted him to examine his own experience. Bouchon plans to publish his investigation as an open source work as well. What people of Lake Michigan observed that night remains a mystery. Based on the information available, we can conclude the objects were moving too erratically and too fast to have been airplanes, helicopters, or weather balloons. These characteristics are eerily similar to the UFOs that have been encountered by the Navy pilots in recent years. This leads us to believe that whatever the people of Lake Michigan saw, it was probably not of this earth. One of the larger mass UFO sightings in history took place in Zimbabwe on September 16th, 1994. 62 students playing during morning recess reported seeing a strange silver craft come down from the sky and land in a nearby field that was full of trees. The students said one or more humanoid creatures dressed in what looked like skin tight black uniforms got out of the craft. These beings were making odd movements, approaching the fence where the students were all assembled. Some of the students said that these creatures seemed to be able to communicate with them telepathically, transmitting a message of concern about the damage that humans were doing to the earth. I hate it when I hear voices inside my head. The witnesses are in their 30s and 40s today, and they're telling the same story now that they told back in 1994. It was about 10 o'clock in the morning. The children went outside for a mid morning break. As they were playing near the school building, something in the distance caught their attention. As the children later told adults, they saw silver round disc. Most of the adults were indoors for a faculty meeting, and they only learned about what the children had seen once their meeting ended. The teachers were skeptical, and they continued the school day as if nothing had happened. The children went home and they told their parents. Some of the children described what they'd seen as being aliens, while others thought that they had seen a Vic Wombo, the evil goblin of Shona and other folklore. It's a word I can't even begin to pronounce, even though I looked it up and I listened to it. Ndeble. I listened to it being said several times, and now I'm drawing a blank. So it was from folklore, a creature. Their parents, who paid the Ariel school a lot of money for tuition, began demanding to know what had actually happened. The Ariel school students were interviewed by authorities and researchers. Cynthia Hind was the first UFO researcher to speak with the children. She then invited UFO researcher Dr. John Mack to investigate as well. Their interviews were videotaped, making a recording of what all the witnesses had to say. The incident is still unexplained today. With so many eyewitnesses all seeing and telling the same story, it must drive the naysayers nuts trying to come up with some kind of a mundane explanation. It was a weather balloon. It had mannequins and monkeys in it. Uh, it was a swamp gas leak of some kind. The kids were all hallucinating. The naysayers will beat themselves to death trying to come up with explanations for things that they should just look at and say, that's a UFO. I wonder how come the government isn't asking these kids what they saw. The folks at Airborne Object Identification and Management Synchronization Group, who comes up with those names? Uh, they should be all over this sighting, asking questions and trying to find out what happened. Instead, they're doing nothing about it. American officials and analysts globally are raising the alarm about a new Defense Department office that is supposed to be handling the government's examination of unidentified flying objects, warning that the move indicates that the military wants to end a brief spell of transparency and shove UFO reports back into a closet under lock and key. Project Blue Book was originally requested by the colonels that were running air bases all over the United States. They'd been seeing objects in the sky and they'd been hearing reports from pilots and from the airmen. The colonels wanted the Air Force to look into this. So they come up with Project Blue Book, which instead of looking into these reports was there to make them go away. That's what the government is good at, making these reports go away. If the government is really interested in looking into what UFOs really are, why is there no official place, office that you and I can call to make a report? If you contact the government to report a UFO, they will refer you to Newfork. When are they going to come up with 1-800 UFO sighting report or something like that? The sun had just set March 13th, 1997, when hundreds of people across Nevada, Arizona, and Mexico witnessed a collection of UFOs in the night sky. The phenomenon became known as the Phoenix Lights, and its authenticity has been debated even up until today. From 7:30 until about 10:30 at night, hundreds of citizens flooded their local police department phone lines with calls wanting to know what they had seen in the sky. They reported floating orbs in a V-shaped craft the size of several football fields moving across the city of Phoenix. While the glowing orbs remained stationary, the V-shaped object was moving, heading south. Even though pilots in the Phoenix area notified air traffic control of what they were seeing, none of the controllers saw anything out of the ordinary on the radar. Well, at least that's what they say. I can just picture some government official walking into the radar operations room and collecting all the tapes and telling them, I wasn't here and this event never happened. Something like that. Just as suddenly as they appeared, the Phoenix Lights all vanished. Some people called a Luke Air Force Base asking what might have been in the sky. The base operations said there was nothing in the sky that night that could have been mistaken for these lights. Nothing. We had no planes in the sky that night. There were no government jets flying around Phoenix. Then suddenly government officials came out saying that these orbs were nothing more than flares being deployed by military training exercise. Oh yeah, we forgot a bunch of airplanes. Well, yeah, they took off and made a bunch of noise, and I completely forgot about them. A bunch of pilots were out buzzing the town, dropping flares, some of which were over private property. The V-shaped craft was explained away as just being a bunch of planes flying in formation. I watched one video of the lights. Uh, the naysayers showed how the lights all vanished as they went behind a mountain range. The thing is, the lights they were showing were not what people had been seeing. Their explanation was lacking. They were trying to use an earlier video to explain away eyewitness reports. One of the few people seeing the Phoenix lights did so at about 6:55 p.m. Now let me say that again. One of the first people to see the Phoenix lights saw them at 6:55 p.m. The man said he saw a V-shaped formation in the skies near Henderson, Nevada. Then at about 8:15, a former police officer in Paulden, Arizona, reported seeing a cluster of orange lights. He followed them through the sky with his binoculars until they disappeared. These were referred to by many as looking like fireballs. 2 minutes later, other calls came in about a group of white and reddish orbs hovering over Prescott, Arizona. There were two distinct groups of UFOs in the sky. one a collection of individual orbs and the other being the V shaped craft. According to the National UFO Reporting Center, NUFORC, the V shaped formation contained anywhere from 5 to 7 lights that were slowly soaring in unison from the northwest before turning almost south. As the formation moved, one of the lights towards the back moved up to the front before falling back to its place again. The V shape was caught on tape by Dr. Lin Kaitai, and it seemed to have 3 lights on each prong of this and the seventh at the tip. Conservative estimates gauged it to span the length of 3 football fields, while others said it was more than a mile long. Now, you may have seen Dr. Kaitai in a movie if you watch the same kind of movies that I do. You may have seen her in Raising Arizona. Dr. Kaitai played Florence, Arizona, the mother of the Arizona quintuplets. She didn't have any lines. She just screamed whenever she discovered that one of her kids had been kidnapped. Yes, that was her. We don't have anything that big, one witness said. It was totally silent. I've never seen anything even close to the colors from the exhaust that propelled that thing. It was as big as downtown Prescott and completely blocked out the stars. 31-year-old Dana Valentine spotted the Phoenix lights from his backyard. He called his father, an aeronautical engineer, outside to have a look. Together, they watched what appeared to be a V shaped craft at about 500 feet passing overhead. You could see the outline of a mass behind the lights, but you couldn't actually see the mass. It was more like a gray distortion of the night sky. It was wavy. I don't know exactly what it was, but I know it's not technology the public has heard of before. It was astonishing and a little frightening, said Tim Lay, who got out of his car to watch the lights. It was so big and so strange you couldn't actually see the object. All you could see was the outline as though something were blotting out the stars. Bill Grava, who had been an air traffic controller for 12 years and worked at the Sky Harbor International Airport tower that night, called the incident weird and inexplicable. He reiterated years later that he still didn't know what to think and he had no idea what he had seen. Phoenix councilwoman Frances Barwood was the first official to publicly demand answers to the Phoenix Lights incident. One of her constituents called and said he had a very clear video of the triangular craft and he wanted to share it with her. A few weeks went by with nothing arriving on her desk. She called and asked about the video, and the witness said that 2 men, saying that they were from her office, had come to his home and they took the video. Barwood didn't have any assistants, let alone 2 of them. She believes that her phone was being tapped and the 2 men were working for some unnamed government agency. The local government called on the Air Force to investigate, but the U.S. Air Force said it was prohibited from doing so after Project Blue Book had been closed down in 1969. Citizens turned to independent organizations like MUFON, but the public outcry for an official explanation never ceased. Governor Symington claimed he hadn't even heard of the incident, but he finally scheduled a press conference on June 19, 1997, to address it. Symington claimed that the government had captured an alien, and they brought out his assistant, Jay Hyler, who was in an alien costume. Everybody had a good laugh at the witness's expense. Symington said, "This just goes to show that you guys are entirely too serious about this. Let's all laugh at the UFO witnesses. Make them feel good." Make them want to report next time they see something. The stunt was met with laughter and applause, and the entire incident was swept away as just being some harmless oddity. In 2007, Symington himself revealed in a number of interviews that he knew the UFO was real. He said in a statement he drove out to watch the Phoenix lights himself. Symington said, "I'm a pilot and I know just about every machine that flies. It was bigger than anything I'd ever seen. It remains a great mystery. Other people saw it, reliable people. I don't know why people would ridicule it. It was enormous. It just felt otherworldly." He added, "In your gut, you could just tell it was otherworldly." He was one of those ridiculing the witnesses. Hmm. He rationalized his dismissive press conference by claiming that he was trying to assuage his constituents who were on the brink of hysteria. For 10 years, he had quietly shared the concerns of the people that he was mocking, saying they're just a bunch of conspiracy theorists. After that stunt of the fake alien, Symington should be apologizing to everybody that he had ridiculed and belittled after seeing the Phoenix lights. This is the kind of government action that leads to so many people seeing things only to keep it to themselves. And it does nothing to get people to rely on those that we elect to take care of things. Yeah, the government, they really care about what you see. Tell them and they'll make fun of you. On the eve of May 9th, 2023, residents of the town of La Plata in Argentina spotted two red balls of fire and a white UFO orb hovering in the night sky. Around 30 bicyclists from Escanada, 20 miles away, also observed these UFOs. Several people caught the flying crafts on video. Walter Romero, a member of the FAO La Plata, was among the first to bring attention to this particular site. Friends of his quickly shared photographs of the event depicting the strange luminous phenomenon in the vicinity of Olmos. Reports flooded in from various parts of southern Greater Buenos Aires, each describing the exact same sight. Two large fiery tongues of red light standing still against the night sky. In spite of almost overcast conditions, the lights were clearly visible. At the same time, reports in various parts of Mexico were also coming in. The video of these lights looked to me like one object with a dark center. They stayed in the same distance from each other as if they were connected. On a dark background, the lights would look like two objects instead of one. Yes, I looked at the video, I looked at a lot of the photographs. It didn't look like anything that should have been flying around. Teams of Pentagon and intelligence community experts will soon be responding to military UFO sightings and conducting field investigations under the newly unveiled defense legislation that is passing in Congress. Lawmakers want scientists and technical experts to analyze data about the objects, or what the military calls unidentified aerial phenomenon, UFOs. I hate that new speak they're using. It's 1984 all over again. The boys in the white lab coats will now be hustling themselves out to sightings of UFO crashes and recoveries. They are to study any recovered material or any medical information from witnesses, according to the text of the annual Defense Authority bill released recently. The bill requires all of the findings to be collected under a new joint UFO office and delivered to Congress in annual reports and a biannual briefing to defense committees, making the most significant UFO legislation ever passed in the U.S. following the high profile encounters with unknown objects being reported by the Navy. Why am I not all excited about this? Oh, yes, the Pentagon drugged their feet with the last few reports, and then when they actually made the reports, they didn't really say anything. They will somehow manage to convince those folks in Washington there's nothing to see here. Pay no attention to the man behind. Well, you know what I mean. Congress tells the military to do something. The military are supposed to do what Congress tells them. After all, Congress is supposed to be in charge. The military act as if they're trying to cooperate, but they need more time to figure out what they're looking at and how they're going to spin the facts to reflect what they think we should know and what we shouldn't. With more and more people becoming willing to tell about what they're seeing, someday we just might get some kind of an answer. It will not be coming from Washington. It will have to come from MUFON or Newfork. A flying saucer will have to land in the middle of a big city, and then people will have to be convinced it's not a hologram. We also have to worry about some kind of a false flag event taking place where control of the entire planet will be wrested away from the few people that still maintain their freedom, all in the name of global security. I hope you enjoyed tonight's show. If you did, tell your friends. Tell people you don't even like that they should be listening to Strange Things with Chris James. I'm still looking for stories for my latest book. If you've seen a UFO, if your grandfather saw a UFO, if you've seen Bigfoot, if you've had a ghost encounter, let me know and I'll put it in my next book. You can contact me at strangethings at arcanasa.com. If you want to read one of my books, you can find them at Amazon or you can get them at the Organic Man Coffee Trike here in Laredo on McPherson. Till next Saturday, this is Chris James, and that's the wrong mouse. I really miss the music, but a lot of people say they don't. So, no music still.